The rain was drumming against the windshield of my Accord, that heavy, rhythmic sound that usually clears my head after a brutal shift at the warehouse. It was just past 11 on a Tuesday night, and the neon sign of the Exxon station on the corner of Elm and 4th was bleeding a blurry red glow through the downpour. I sat there in the idling car, staring at my steering wheel, feeling the kind of exhaustion that settles deep into your bones, the kind that makes your eyelids feel like lead. I had just pulled a double, 12 hours of moving crates and checking manifests, all so I could keep our heads above water. When I say our heads, I meant mine and Mark's. Mark had been my best friend since our sophomore year at Ohio State, the guy who shared his last $20 with me when we were living on instant ramen, the guy who stood by me when my dad passed away. So when he called me 3 months ago, sounding completely broken after his tech startup collapsed and his landlord evicted him, I didn't even hesitate. I told him to pack his bags and come over. My apartment wasn't huge, just a 2-bedroom place in a quiet suburb of Columbus, but I had a comfortable leather couch and a spare set of keys. I told him he could stay as long as he needed to get back on his feet. No rent, no pressure, just family helping family. That's what we were. Or at least, that's what I thought we were. I put the car in drive and pulled into the apartment complex parking lot, finding my usual spot near the dumpster. The courtyard was empty, puddles reflecting the dim yellow security lights. As I walked up the concrete stairs to the second floor, I was already looking forward to a hot shower and a cold beer. I knew Mark would probably be up, either playing Xbox or scrolling through job boards on his laptop. He'd been down lately, understandably, and I'd been trying to keep his spirits up. I even bought his favorite six-pack on Sunday to celebrate a lead he had on a remote consulting gig. I reached the top of the stairs, my keys jingling quietly in my hand, and walked down the carpeted hallway to door 204. I unlocked the deadbolt, the familiar click echoing in the quiet corridor, and pushed the door open. The apartment was dark, except for the dim amber light filtering in from the kitchen window. The TV was off. The silence hit me first, a heavy, suffocating kind of quiet that felt out of place. Usually, Mark had some podcast running, or the fridge buzzing, but tonight, the air felt thick, almost electric. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me so I wouldn't wake him if he had finally managed to fall asleep early. I kicked off my muddy work boots by the mat and walked toward the kitchen to grab a glass of water. That's when I noticed his sneakers weren't by the door. Mark always left his worn-out Nikes right by the mat, a habit I constantly nagged him about. I frowned, thinking maybe he'd finally gone out to a bar to blow off some steam, though he didn't have the money for it. I took a sip of water, the cold liquid shocking my throat, and turned around to head toward my bedroom. As I crossed the living room, my eyes adjusted to the shadows, and I noticed something on the coffee table. It was 2 wine glasses, empty, with dark red residue pooling at the bottom. That was strange. Mark was a strictly beer and whiskey guy, and I hadn't bought wine in months. Beside the glasses lay a silver earring, a delicate little hoop with a tiny diamond chip. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden cold prickle of adrenaline shooting down my spine. I knew that earring. I had bought it for Sarah for our 3rd anniversary last November. Sarah, my girlfriend of 4 years, the woman I was planning to propose to this upcoming winter. She lived about 20 minutes away in her own studio apartment downtown, and she was supposed to be at a bridal shower for her cousin tonight in Cleveland, an hour and a half away. She had texted me around 7, saying the traffic was terrible and she was just going to stay over at her aunt's place to save herself the drive back in the storm. I stared at the earring on the wooden table, my brain refusing to connect the dots. It was like looking at a puzzle piece that didn't belong to the picture on the box. Maybe she dropped it last weekend, I told myself, my mind desperately scrambling for a logical, innocent explanation. Maybe it had been lost in the couch cushions, and Mark found it while looking for his phone. Yeah, that had to be it. But then why were there 2 wine glasses? Why did the apartment feel so heavy with secrets? I walked down the short, carpeted hallway toward my bedroom, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every step felt like walking through wet cement. The door to my bedroom was slightly ajar, a sliver of yellow light spilling out onto the floorboards. I hadn't left my bedroom light on. I never did. As I got closer, I heard a sound that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a low laugh, soft and familiar, followed by the rustle of sheets. It was Sarah's laugh, that quiet, breathless sound she only made when she was genuinely happy, when she felt completely safe. My hand reached out for the doorknob, my fingers trembling so violently I could barely grip the metal. The world around me seemed to slow down, the ambient noise of the rain outside fading into a distant, muffled hum. My chest felt tight, like a heavy iron band was being forged around my lungs. I didn't want to push that door. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, run back to my car, drive away, and pretend I never came home early. But the dark, ugly curiosity, the primal need to know the truth, pulled my hand forward. I pushed the door open, the hinges giving a faint, agonizing creak. The scene inside burned itself into my retinas instantly, a vivid nightmare that I knew, even in that split second, would haunt me for the rest of my life. My bed, the one Sarah and I had chosen together, the one with the gray comforter she insisted on buying because it matched the curtains, was a chaotic mess. Mark was sitting up against the headboard, his bare chest glistening in the warm lamplight, a relaxed, smirk-like smile on his face. And right next to him, her head resting on his shoulder, her long brown hair tangled across his chest, was Sarah. She was wearing one of my oversized flannel shirts, the buttons undone. They were looking at something on Mark's phone, laughing quietly, completely oblivious to the fact that the man who provided the roof over their heads, the man who loved them both unconditionally, was standing less than 10 feet away. The silence that followed was deafening. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. I just stood there, my backpack still slung over one shoulder, a half-empty water glass frozen in my hand. For a few seconds, neither of them looked up. They were wrapped in their own private, illicit world, a world they had built right in the middle of mine. Then, as if sensing the sudden shift in the temperature of the room, Mark's eyes flicked toward the doorway. The smile vanished from his face instantly, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed expression of absolute terror. He froze, his body going rigid against the headboard. Sarah felt the sudden tension in him and turned her head to see what he was staring at. When her eyes met mine, the color drained from her face so fast I thought she might pass out. She let out a sharp, choked gasp, instinctively pulling the flannel shirt tighter around her chest and shrinking back against the pillows. "David," she whispered, her voice cracking, sounding incredibly small and fragile. It was a voice I didn't recognize, a voice stripped of all its usual confidence. "David, oh my God, you're supposed to be at work." Those words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Not "I'm sorry," not "this isn't what it looks like," but a confirmation that the only reason they were caught was a flaw in their timeline. My early arrival was the mistake, not their betrayal. I looked at Mark, the guy I called my brother, the guy whose tears I had wiped away when his life fell apart. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He stared down at the blanket, his jaw shifting as he swallowed hard, his hands twitching against the sheets. The anger didn't come immediately. First, it was just a profound, hollow emptiness, a feeling that everything I knew about my life, my relationships, and my future had been an elaborate, cruel joke. The apartment I worked 60 hours a week to afford, the woman I wanted to build a family with, the friend I protected, it was all a facade. They had taken my generosity, my trust, and my love, and they had turned it into a weapon to stab me in the back. I stood in the doorway, the rain still battering the window behind me, feeling completely and utterly alone in my own home. The silence stretched out between us, heavy and suffocating, taking away like a bomb that had already gone off, but left us standing in the wreckage. I looked from Sarah's terrified, pale face to Mark's downcast eyes. He still couldn't look at me. The guy who used to give me pep talks before my job interviews, the guy who shared a cheap apartment with me in college and swore we'd make it big together, was now just a coward hiding under my own bedsheets. The sheer absurdity of it choked me. My hands began to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that started in my fingers and crept up my arms. The glass of water in my hand felt impossibly heavy. Without a word, I walked back into the kitchen and set the glass down on the counter. It hit the granite with a loud, sharp clink that seemed to shatter the temporary paralysis holding the apartment together. I heard the frantic rustle of blankets from the bedroom, followed by the hurried thud of bare feet on the hardwood floor. Within seconds, Sarah appeared at the edge of the kitchen, frantically buttoning up my flannel shirt, her eyes wide and rimmed with red. She looked desperate, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. "David, please, just let me explain," she sobbed, reaching out a hand toward me. Her fingers were trembling. It's not what you think. It was an accident. We didn't mean for any of this to happen, I swear to you." "An accident?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was hollow, low, and entirely devoid of inflection. It was the voice of a ghost. "An accident is spilling coffee, Sarah. An accident is taking the wrong exit on the highway. You don't accidentally drive 20 miles in a rainstorm, walk into my apartment, pour 2 glasses of wine, and get into my bed with my best friend. That is a choice. Every single second of it was a choice." She flinched as if I'd struck her, the tears finally spilling over her cheeks and ruining her makeup, leaving dark streaks down her face. "We were just talking," she pleaded, her voice rising in pitch, a frantic note of hysteria creeping in. "He was so down about his job search, and I was trying to comfort him. We had some wine and we got confused, David. I love you. You know I love you. We're supposed to get married. Please, don't do this." "Don't do this?" I let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a bark. "I'm not doing anything, Sarah. You did it. Both of you." Just then, Mark walked out of the hallway. He had thrown on a pair of gray sweatpants, the ones I had loaned him 2 weeks ago when he didn't have time to do his laundry. He stood a few feet behind Sarah, his shoulders slumped, looking down at his feet. The sight of him wearing my clothes, standing in my kitchen after coming out of my bedroom, ignited something primitive inside me. The numbness vanished, replaced instantly by a wave of pure, blistering heat. The blood roared in my ears, a deafening white noise that drowned out the sound of the rain. I took a step toward him, my fists clenching so hard my knuckles turned white. "David, man, I'm sorry," Mark mumbled, his voice muffled, still refusing to meet my gaze. "I messed up. I know I messed up. I'm so sorry." "Messed up?" I walked up to him until we were inches apart. I could smell the wine on his breath, mixed with the faint scent of Sarah's lavender perfume. It made me want to vomit. "You didn't mess up, Mark. You systematically destroyed the only person who gave a shit about you when you were on the street. I took you in. I fed you. I gave you a place to sleep when everyone else in your life turned their backs on you because your ego ruined your company. And this is what you do? In my bed?" "It wasn't like that," he stammered, finally looking up, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. "It was a one-time thing, I swear. We connected over how stressed we both were. It just happened tonight." "Don't lie to me," I roared. The volume of my own voice startled me, echoing off the kitchen tiles and shaking the small space. "Don't you dare lie to me." "The earring on the table, Mark." "She left it here. I haven't seen her wear those earrings since last week. How long has this been going on? Tell me the truth, or so help me God, I will throw you off this balcony." Mark swallowed hard, looking over at Sarah, who had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she wept. The silence that followed was his admission. It wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't a moment of weakness brought on by a rainy night and a bottle of cheap wine. This had been happening right under my nose, probably for weeks. Every time I left for a night shift, every time I pulled extra hours to make sure we could afford groceries, they were converting my home into their secret rendezvous. I remembered all the little things that hadn't made sense over the last month. The way Sarah suddenly started asking detailed questions about my work schedule. The way Mark would always be awake and showered, sitting on the couch with an eerie air of contentment when I came home at 6 a.m. The subtle, awkward shifts in conversation whenever the 3 of us hung out. It all clicked into place with a terrifying, crystal-clear clarity. I stepped back from them, feeling a sudden, overwhelming wave of disgust. The anger turned cold again, hardening into a wall of absolute finality. I looked at the two people I had trusted more than anyone else in the entire world, and they looked like complete strangers to me. They looked pathetic. "Get out," I said quietly.
Sarah looked up, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. "David, please, it's raining outside. It's midnight. Let's just talk about this until morning. We can fix this, please." "There is nothing to fix, Sarah," I said, my voice completely steady now, dead and cold. "The girl I wanted to marry wouldn't be in my best friend's arms in my own bed. You are a stranger to me. Grab your purse, grab your keys, and get out of my apartment." I turned my gaze to Mark, who was watching me cautiously. "And you have 5 minutes to pack whatever fits into one bag. Anything you leave behind is going straight into the dumpster by the parking lot. If you're still in this apartment in 5 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how I feel about what you did." Mark didn't say a word. He knew me well enough to recognize the tone in my voice. He knew he had pushed me past the point of reason. He turned around and hurried back into the guest room, the sound of zippers opening and clothes being shoved into nylon bags echoing down the hall. Sarah stood there for another moment, looking at me with a desperate, pleading expression, waiting for a crack in my armor, a sign that I would break down and forgive her. But I just stood there, leaning against the kitchen counter, staring straight past her at the front door. The rain outside seemed to intensify, a deafening downpour that felt like it was washing away the last remnants of my old life.
When she realized I wasn't going to look at her again, she let out a broken sob, grabbed her designer purse from the kitchen island, and walked toward the front door. She didn't look back as she opened it and stepped out into the stormy night, leaving the door wide open behind her. The door remained wide open, letting in the damp, chilly air from the hallway and the distant, muffled sound of Sarah's heels clicking down the concrete stairs. I didn't move to close it. I just stood there, staring at the empty frame, watching the mist drift into the entryway. My apartment felt massive now, an empty, hollow cavern that had suddenly been stripped of its warmth. From the back room, the frantic sounds of Mark packing continued, the sharp zip of a duffel bag, the heavy thud of a closet door swinging shut, the rustle of papers being cleared off the small desk I had set up for him. Each sound felt like a hammer hitting a raw nerve, but I kept my eyes fixed on the open front door, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. A few minutes later, the noise stopped. Mark walked out into the living room, carrying a large black duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a chaotic armful of loose clothes and winter jackets that wouldn't fit inside. He looked small, his posture completely collapsed, the confident tech entrepreneur persona he usually carried entirely shattered. He halted a few feet away from the kitchen island, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and anxiety. He wanted to say something. I could see it in the way his jaw twitched, the way he opened his mouth and then closed it again, searching for some magical combination of words that could lessen the weight of what he had done. "David," he finally muttered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "I left my extra shoes in the closet. I'll come back for them later when—" "No, you won't," I interrupted, not even turning my head to look at him. My voice was a flat line. "Whatever is left in that room goes into the trash tonight. If I see your face anywhere near this building again, I'm calling the cops and reporting you for trespassing. We are done, Mark. Your stuff, your text messages, your name, it's all dead to me." He flinched, shifting the heavy bag on his shoulder. He looked like he wanted to argue, to remind me of our history, of the 10 years of friendship we were throwing away in a single night. But he knew he didn't have a leg to stand on. He had violated the ultimate code, the unwritten rule of brotherhood, and he had done it under my own roof while relying on my charity. Without another word, he walked past me, his heavy boots dragging on the carpet, and stepped out into the bright, fluorescent light of the hallway. He pulled the door closed behind him with a soft, definitive click. The moment the lock engaged, the silence hit me like a physical force. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright, the burning heat of the anger that had carried me through the confrontation, suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crushing weight. My knees buckled slightly, and I had to lean heavily against the kitchen counter to keep from collapsing onto the linoleum floor. I slid down the front of the cabinets, buried my face in my hands, and let out a long, shuddering breath. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears, too heavy to be released that easily. It felt like a physical ache in my chest, a tight, suffocating pressure right beneath my ribs. I looked around the apartment, the place that had been my sanctuary. Everywhere I looked, I saw the ghosts of the people who had just betrayed me. The television where Mark and I had spent hours watching the Buckeyes play on Saturdays. The dining table where Sarah and I had celebrated her promotion just 3 weeks ago, opening a bottle of champagne and talking about the house we wanted to buy in the suburbs once we saved up enough for a down payment. It was all a lie. The memories felt corrupted, tainted by the realization that while I was planning a future, they were planning their next secret hookup. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and walked into my bedroom. The scent of Sarah's perfume still hung heavy in the air, a cruel reminder of what had been happening on those sheets just 30 minutes prior.
The gray comforter was crumpled, thrown to the foot of the bed in their rush to get up. I couldn't look at it. The sight made my stomach turn. I grabbed the edges of the sheets, ripping them off the mattress with a sudden, violent jerk, tearing the pillowcases off the pillows and throwing the whole mess into a heap in the corner of the room. I didn't care that it was 1 a.m, or that I had to be back at the warehouse in less than 5 hours. I couldn't sleep in that bed. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. I walked back into the living room, grabbing a blanket from the linen closet, and threw myself onto the leather couch. The same couch where Mark had been sleeping for the past 3 months. I stared up at the ceiling, the shadows of the rain dancing across the white drywall as the streetlights flickered outside. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction, every text message, every strange look from the past few weeks, putting the pieces of the puzzle together in a grotesque new light. Around 3 a.m, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up the dark room, displaying Sarah's face. I stared at it, watching the phone vibrate against the wood, the rhythmic buzzing sounding incredibly loud in the quiet apartment. It stopped, then immediately began to buzz again. Then a text message popped up. "Please, David, I'm at my apartment. I can't stop crying. Just let me come back and talk to you. Mark means nothing to me. It was a mistake."
I love you so much. Please don't throw away 4 years over this. I read the words feeling absolutely nothing. The desperation in her text didn't move me. It just disgusted me. "Don't throw away 4 years," she wrote, as if I was the one making the choice to end things, as if I was the one responsible for the destruction of our relationship. The sheer lack of accountability, the attempt to gaslight me into feeling like the unreasonable one, hardened the last soft part of my heart. I didn't reply. I blocked her number, deleted her contact, and did the same to Mark's. I erased their social media profiles from my feeds, scrubbing them from my digital life the same way I had scrubbed their physical presence from my home. I lay back down on the couch, pulling the blanket up to my chin, staring into the darkness. The rain outside was finally starting to let up, transitioning into a steady, dreary drizzle that matched the gray emptiness inside my chest. I knew the morning would bring reality. I knew I would have to go to work, face my coworkers, pretend that my life hadn't completely disintegrated into a country song stereotype within the span of an hour. But as I finally closed my eyes, a dangerous, cold thought began to take root in the back of my mind. They thought they could just walk away. They thought a few tears and a hasty exit would be the end of the story. They had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my self-respect, and left me with nothing but the pieces to pick up. But as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside the window, I realized one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The sun broke through the clouds around 6, throwing harsh, unforgiving beams of light across the living room. I hadn't slept a wink. I just lay there on the couch, watching the dust motes dance in the morning light, feeling the heavy, rhythmic throb of a tension headache behind my eyes. My alarm went off on my phone, its bright, cheerful chime completely discordant with the wreckage of my apartment. I sat up, rubbing my face with my hands, feeling the rough stubble on my jaw. I had a choice to make right then. I could call out of work, crawl into the guest bed, and let the depression swallow me whole, or I could get up, put on my boots, and start moving forward. I chose to get up.
I spent the next 45 minutes systematically purging my life of their presence. I grabbed a heavy-duty black trash bag from under the sink and went to town. Mark's remaining sneakers, his extra chargers, the half-empty bottles of shampoo he left in the bathroom, everything went into the bag. I walked into my bedroom and threw the stripped sheets and pillowcases in there too. I didn't want a single item in my home that carried their scent or their memory.
I carried the heavy bag down the stairs, the cool morning air shocking my lungs, and flung it deep into the dumpster, watching the metal lid slam shut with a definitive, echoing crash. It felt like a small, necessary funeral. When I got to the warehouse, the routine saved me. The physical labor of unloading shipments and operating the forklift required just enough concentration to keep my mind from spiraling, but the anger remained, sitting quietly in the pit of my stomach like a cold stone. My coworkers noticed I was quieter than usual, but in a place like that, guys don't pry. They just figured I was exhausted from the double shift the night before, and I let them think it. But every time I paused, every time I took a sip of water, the image of them in my bed flashed across my mind, fueling a quiet, calculated resolve. I wasn't going to seek violent revenge. I wasn't going to key cars or scream at their doors. That was messy, and it gave them too much power. No, the best revenge was exposure, and letting the consequences of their own choices destroy them. During my lunch break, I sat in my Accord and made a few phone calls. The first was to the landlord's office. I informed them that Mark was no longer occupant on the premises and requested that the locks be changed immediately, offering to pay the fee out of pocket. They agreed to send maintenance over by the afternoon. The second call was to my cell phone provider to split Sarah off my family plan, cutting her data line.
But the most important move I made was a single group message. I didn't send a long, emotional paragraph. I didn't call them names. I simply took a photo of the silver earrings sitting next to the 2 empty wine glasses on my coffee table, and I sent it to our core group of mutual friends, along with Sarah's parents, who had always treated me like a son. Beneath the image, I wrote a single sentence. Came home early from my shift last night to find Mark and Sarah in my bed. Sarah is safe at her apartment, and Mark has been evicted. I turned my phone on silent and put it in my pocket. I didn't want to see the immediate fallout, the frantic text messages, or the waves of shockwaves hitting our social circle. I just wanted the truth to exist out in the open, where they couldn't twist the narrative or play the victims. By the time my shift ended at 5, the storm had truly arrived. When I finally turned my phone back on, it vibrated continuously for 2 solid minutes. Missed calls from Mark, paragraphs of apologies and excuses from Sarah, and dozens of messages from our friends expressing absolute disgust and disbelief. Sarah's dad had sent me a brief, heartbroken text stating he was deeply ashamed of his daughter and that he was incredibly sorry for what she had done to me. When I returned to my apartment, the air felt different. It was still quiet, but it no longer felt heavy with secrets.
The maintenance guy had already changed the deadbolt, leaving a shiny new pair of keys on the kitchen counter. I locked the door behind me, knowing that neither of them could ever invade my space again. I went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and walked over to the living room window, looking out over the quiet Ohio suburb as the evening commute began to slow down. The pain didn't magically vanish, and I knew the upcoming weeks would be incredibly lonely. 4 years of a shared life with Sarah and a decade of brotherhood with Mark couldn't be erased by a new lock and a trash bag. There would be financial adjustments, awkward social gatherings to avoid, and moments of intense bitterness to fight through. But as I took a sip of the whiskey, feeling the burn coat my throat, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation wash over me. Peace. The worst had already happened. The betrayal was out in the open. The parasites were gone from my home, and the foundation of lies they had built had crumbled to dust. I was standing in the wreckage of my old life, yes, but for the first time in a very long time, the ground beneath my feet was completely solid. I was single, I was hurt, but I was entirely free.